Good evening and welcome to episode 46 of Guru Manthan. And thank you for joining us for this edition of our series of 50 discussions with educationists and thinkers. It's been happening every Saturday, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. And the Guru Manthan talks are being organized by the Vivekananda Institute for Leadership Development, VLEAD, which is an initiative of the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement. And VLEAD focuses on developing human and social capital for nation building by enhancing the potential of individuals and institutions across the development sector. And four major sectors that we focus on: government, NGOs, corporates, and the community. And Guru Manthan, which started in 2020 and has continued to come to you right through, is one of those initiatives, essentially a platform, particularly during the COVID time, to discuss, share, debate, and also engage with educationists and leaders in the space on a variety of topics and diverse perspectives from across the world. As always, the format of the talk would be that the guest speaker would speak for about 25 minutes, followed by a moderated Q&A, and which will also probably last for about 25 minutes, and there would be a short closing at the end of it. Today, we have with us Professor Rajaram Sharma, and it's my pleasure to hand over the introduction of the speaker to Dr. R. Balu.
Thank you, Ramesh. It's a pleasure to be introducing Sharma. If 35, 36 years ago, when I first met him, if I ever thought that I would be introducing him to a virtual talk, it would have been a little difficult for me to have believed it, because I would never even imagine there's some concept called a virtual webinar at that point of time. So we met as young people, both of us very idealistic in our own ways. And I still remember he driving down in his, I think he had that small little, I don't know if you can call it a motorcycle also, but to the hostel at the medical college to meet me. He was still in the RIE at that time doing a master's. And he would share his vision of what education should be, and I would share my vision of what education should not be. So it would be nice fun, and we went our own ways in terms of trying to do out what we believed in. And that is the fun part. He formally, to tell him what he is, I think he had a master's in science education. If I remember, it was chemistry, because my friend was doing his physics, and that's how we all met. And he's an MEd, he's got a PhD, and he didn't stop with the master's, he went on to do a PhD. I think he also went on to be a great teacher, educator, trainer, researcher, all rolled into one, with focus being on looking at how do you enable and build teachers' competencies. How do you focus on looking at using ICT as an enabler? Because today everybody thinks technology can be a replacement for education itself. And I think he was in the initial days talking about how do you make it an enabler, how do you use NCT for all this. And I think his journey from the NCERT led him to look at building a sort of a resource platform, the National Repository for Open Education Resources. He worked on the policy for ICT in education. He's also did a lot of work on the e-Pathshala, the web and then mobile interface. It brings digital versions of textbooks. I'm sure he's dabbled in the Swayam platform. If I remember, his last major responsibility was being the Joint Director of the Central Institute of Educational Technology, the NCERT. A good friend, and it's a great pleasure to have him here to share his thoughts. And I think this is long overdue to listen to him and his thoughts. So thank you, Sharma, to be here with us, and to bring forth your views to all the teachers in this audience. Looking forward to listening to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Will you help me share my screen?
Praveen or Ramesh?
Yes, sir. You should be able to now.
I don't see that interface.
You might just have to minimize the.
Just a second.
Your share screen thing might work now. Are you able to do it?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Good evening to all of you, and thank you, Balu, for the nice introduction. And it's very nice to be amongst people who already know each other and therefore do not have to formally go about saying things that they might not even have heard of. Nice to share ideas with all of you. I'm given to understand that a majority of you are practicing teachers, and therefore I chose a topic which I believe impacts all of us. Over the last at least 2 years, most of us have lived through a situation which we had never been trained for, a situation that we never had even imagined. None of our preparations, either as a teacher, either in our teacher training courses or in general life, had sort of prepared us for. Now, amongst the various disruptions that have happened, various problems that we have faced over the last 2 years, one of the most challenging ones to me has been the impact on children. Not only that we took them away from schools, but then they have had, I wouldn't call it opportunity, because of the negative connotations of the situation, but they had to see death at very close quarters. Not only around them, perhaps many of them have had someone near and dear passing away, but they have also seen images of this across media, and we can only sort of imagine what could have happened to them. So to me, the child who's going to come back to something called a normal school, if at all there will be one soon, is not the same as that child who was with us earlier. And this is an issue which I believe all of us need to start thinking through and see if there is some way in which we can psychologically empathize with them, psychologically deal with the situation of trying to, still get them back into this whole thing. Not just because we want them to start, focusing back on science and maths and all that. That's amongst the most trivial of this. But as human beings, they have been hurt, and this is going to be the general focus of what I will be speaking to you about. And this is what I have placed before me as my objective, that we will look at.
The screen is not shared. You may just want to check that once.
Mm-hmm. Where do I have this interface of yours where there used to be a larger interface which allowed me to share.
It's at the bottom of the screen.
Right at the bottom of the screen.
Okay, now what do I need to do? I need to click on this perhaps. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And then go here. Am I being shared now?
No, not yet.
Sorry.
You have to select the window after you click
one second.
Yeah.
Now?
Yeah, it's
okay.
Visible. Yes.
Okay, good. Fine. So I have these as my objectives, that I would like teachers who were forced into this new way of looking at schooling, and over the last 1 year have sort of grappled with it, have tried to do things which they were never trained for, tried to do things that they had not learned, tried to do things which some of us were even rebelling against, using smartphones as a means of teaching and so on. But then over that 1 year, we have come to accept that circumstances don't allow much more leeway than that. And therefore, we have tried to adapt to these technologies. So therefore, I would like all of us to critically look at what is it that we learned, what is it that we were able to do, what is it that we were not able to do, and whether there is a way in which we can still continue to use technology, but adapt it in a manner in which we can be far more effective in what we are doing. So I believe that there is a need and there is an opportunity for redesigning whatever it is that we were doing in the name of schooling. And that is what we will look at as we go along. So now, what is it that has changed between the times when we were having regular classrooms? We used to have some predetermined rooms into which we could walk in. Fourth period mathematics, and the mathematics teacher walks in there, and then she's sure that everybody there knows that this is a maths teacher, this is the maths textbook we're doing with, this is the chapter we're working with, and so on and so forth. So there was some kind of a givenness to this whole school. And that's one thing that we suddenly disrupted. We stopped schools. We said children are going to remain at home, teachers are going to remain at home, and we're going to talk to each other. We're going to try and see if we can do something with those children. So this dispersed group of students that we are dealing with comes with its own challenges. There is an invisible student in a way, and we are going to be teaching. And what are we going to be doing? We're practically, all of us are going to be talking to a screen the way I'm trying to do now. And I don't see any of my students in front of me, and I'm talking to them. That itself would be a very, very big jump in the way we look at things. But more importantly, we will try and concentrate on the packaging that we are going to do, the planning that we will do for our teaching learning. The second aspect that changed here was that we are doing something called distance teaching learning. It is very popular amongst people that we will call this online learning. But I'll try and build up on this and try to point out to you that it isn't just online learning, that there is a little more to it. Now, in this context, what we need to recognize is that technology became the major vehicle, not because we had a choice, we chose it, we said we want to use that technology, but because there wasn't any other way of networking with the students. For anything called teaching learning to happen, we are basically visualizing that there will be a network of people. That every child, every student of mine is going to be networked to me, is going to be connected to me. And there is some way in which this interaction between me and that student is going to enable that student to become better at learning and also learn whatever it is that our syllabi, whatever it is that our exposures plan to deliver to them. Now, within this context, technology itself plays a very major limiting role because we might not have the right devices, we might not have the right connectivity. Teachers themselves were not as if they were sitting in a studio with everything already pre-planned for them. They might be sitting in their homes with smartphones in which they knew only a few apps, and now suddenly they have to become masters of everything there, and they need to work with that. We have coped very well, and almost all schools claim that they have managed to somehow find a way of networking with the children using technology to communicate. And each of us as teachers have had a chance to learn this new technology. The students have had an even more important challenge. Now, just imagine a 10-year-old child, 14-year-old child sitting and staring at a small screen for something like 5 to 6 hours a day. And then within that, there's going to be some small write-up that we're going to show, some small slide that we're going to show. And, we trying to, and I'm very sure even now, some of you are actually looking at this whole thing using a smartphone. And you'll realize that while I believe I have used the best font around, I have used the best colors around, they're not necessarily communicating as easily as that. So there is a need for teachers and students to adapt to these new routines. And as a friend of mine, Satish, he keeps reminding us that any such adaptation should not be like teaching a lame person to limp. It should always be teaching a lame person to walk. And we will try and examine if there is some way in which, while we are forced to use technology, we will try and see if technology does not become that impediment to our dreams, the children's dreams, the way we wanted to go about doing this teaching learning. It will require an adaptation. It will require a change in the way we look at this whole design. So now the question that we're going to ask ourselves is, can information and communication technologies replace classrooms? And if you imagine all those things that you did in the classroom and try and ask each component of that, how does it translate into this new medium and how I should package for that. Now, in this context, all of us worked with something called a lesson plan. And typically it used to be a plan for that 40 minutes of you being on stage and the children sitting in front of you. I'm trying to expand that concept a little. I'm also trying to include all those things that you imagined before that and all those things that happened after this lesson. So typically, if you take a chapter, you would have broken that up into some 10 to 15 lessons or periods over which you would spread this content around. You would not only have your lecture, you would be standing in the class and instructing them. You would be using aids like the blackboard, perhaps, maybe small equipment here and there, maybe some charts and posters or whatever. You would have involved children in activities. You would have at least asked them questions. You would have had some level of interaction within the classrooms. You would have followed that up with some kind of a homework where children were allowed to work on their own. You would have encouraged them to revisit many of these ideas again through their textbooks, through their classwork notebooks, and try and respond to the opportunities for learning that we provided them. Now, each one of these will have to be translated into the technology form that we are talking of. And it is in that context that I would like you to focus on the difference between what we call online technologies and what we call offline technologies. When you sit in front of a television screen the way I'm doing right now and speaking into it, this session lasts as long as on the other side, the student is there, and on this side, the teacher is there, and then there is a live connection available between the two of us. And whatever I am speaking is audible to the other side. Whatever I'm showing is visible to the other side. And this session is live, and we call such sessions online. If I were to use SMS, if I were to use WhatsApp, if I were to use an attachment in a mail, if I were to send off notes, worksheets, problem sets, instructions for activities, and all of these as documents, as instructions to the student, I could not possibly use online technologies. I couldn't possibly hold up a worksheet in front of the screen and say, all of you look at this worksheet and start doing the problems. It would look very silly doing that. And anyway, it is not a practical way of doing it. Also, as soon as the session is over, the class is over. The student has no chance whatsoever to revisit this class. I didn't understand something that she said 10 minutes ago. Let me try and revisit that whole thing. This itself is no more possible. Now, I'm a fan of offline technologies simply because they persist, they remain. I can send off notes to you, those notes will remain with you. I'm sure the small document, an outline of our talk today that I shared with all of you is there with you, even if you have not had a chance to look at them today. Perhaps after this talk, you will have a chance to revisit them. Now, that is an opportunity that I believe learning requires. And every learner, however much that person is in sync with the method, the style of this teacher, will not be able to catch up with every lesson with the same efficiency as you did. So therefore, it is preferable that we try and provide as many opportunities for learning, the instructions for learning, the notes that are required for that, the links to various other web resources, perhaps your own video presentation. If, for instance, it is recorded and sent off to them, the student will have an opportunity to look at it again. Maybe not today, maybe it's not necessary because it is still fresh in my mind, but 3 months down the line, when you announce an examination and I want to prepare for that, it would be very nice that I was able to revisit this lesson. So in a way, if I were to use technologies, I would lean towards offline technologies more than online technologies. It also expands the possibilities. Like I said, you could send off worksheets, you can send off questions, you can send off activity sheets, you can send off, you can even get students to start writing things and sending it back to you and so on. Now, it also begs the question, therefore, as to what will I use online for. I would prefer to use online as a question and answer forum. And this is where my first suggestion for a change in design of lessons occurs. Typically, by the time the child crosses, let us say, 6th standard or 5th standard, the child is already capable of reading the textbook. It might not understand everything that it's reading, but it will be able to fluently read this book, or at least that's the expectation that we have depending upon the age and the psychological characteristics of these children. If not 6th, maybe by 7th, by 8th, the child is able to handle its own textbooks. So therefore, I will expect my 8th standard student to be able to read its own science textbook and social studies textbook and maths textbook and work through the instructions that are given in those books. So I would begin with handing over this activity as my first activity much before I start the lesson. So who starts the lesson? My student starts the lesson as homework. They read the chapter, they do these exercises, they try and do everything that they believe they can do. There will be small things that perhaps, new words, perhaps new terminology, perhaps an activity which they do not understand, perhaps something in which they fail to do and are not able to troubleshoot it. Now, I'll flag all of these issues and hold them up for an online consultation with me. Now, what does this do? I'll come to it shortly of how this will transform my classroom, but then imagine this possibility that the child already has read the textbook, already has tried to process everything that is there in that textbook, looked at the maps, looked at the drawings, looked at a graph there, tried to do all the questions that are given at the end of it, maybe work through some examples. You might have added additional activities, additional worksheets for children to work on. So all this self-learning has happened. And now, instead of having one teacher, we actually have in a classroom of 50, 51 teachers. All of us can participate as if we are equals in this whole process. Run through each paragraph and see which of these portions we did not understand. What is it that we need to decode? What is it that will require additional explanation? What is it that will require perhaps looking at a video, looking at various things? So we generally call this as flipped learning, but then you could don't worry about the terminology. Essentially, what we are saying is we believe that children are not only interested and responsible for their own learning, but they are actually capable of learning all of these things on their own. And we will expect them, we will demand from them that they make that first attempt. And after that, they will try and get back to the class only for clarifying their doubts, only for demonstrating to the teacher that they have successfully completed that lesson. Now, if this happens, this entire burden of trying to go through the chapters and teach everything and explain as if children are not even able to read their own textbooks, that entire burden is removed from you. And I believe therein lies one great advantage, that your time has been relieved for doing something more than what the textbook, what the syllabi, what the minimum level of work that was expected of you. Now, it is in this context that I would like you to look at technology. Don't get worried about whether you have these apps or that app, or you have this software or that software and what kind of connectivity and so on, but try and raise a wish list for your teaching style and say, if somebody gave me technology, I will demand that the following things are available to me in that. So don't ask whether a whiteboard is available or not. Don't ask if animations can be used or not, but say, I want to teach this chapter in the following manner. Tell me if you have a technology support for that. So the wish list emerges from our teaching plan, and the teaching plan itself emerges from what our students are capable of and what our students can do on their own. So we get to something called designing this new class. And it is in this context, perhaps in a very rich circumstances, perhaps the school can give out an instruction and say, all of you go and buy the latest iPhone or buy the latest Samsung Galaxy Note or whatever, and you will all be dressed up in your uniforms and you'll be having this tripod in front of you with a light facing you and so on and so forth. There's some way in which the school can prescribe a technology. Most of us are not going to be in such a circumstance. This lays a major challenge. There could be students who one little smartphone in their house, a 4-inch, 3-inch screen, and perhaps there are 4 siblings and all of them are using the same time for learning. Perhaps there is a phone with a keypad on it and with almost nothing called multimedia features in that. Perhaps there is no connectivity available during most of the time when these classes are in operation. So without having actually assessed what is that level of connectivity that I can be assured of, it would be extremely unfair for me to sit and run off my online class with no student on the other side available, or at least not everyone being able to access this class. So I would strongly suggest that each school, in the context in which they are operating, try and make an assessment of what is that minimum technology that everybody has. And this is where the offline scores, irrespective of which kind of phone they have, an offline content can be shared with them. Of course, you will ask me, how do you send an email and all that, but I'll come to that shortly. There are ways in which we can adapt this technology also. But I am suggesting that that online interaction be limited to not a prescribed lesson from my side, but a seeking of an appointment by the student saying, sir, we would like these questions to be answered. Tell us when can we contact you. So it's a kind of a custom lesson. And it also means that you don't teach all the 50 of them together. You teach maybe only those 4 who have doubts, or you're interacting with another 4 who have another set of doubts, or you're evaluating somebody who has already completed the lesson, or you're hand holding a child who's not even able to process this lesson. You're able to individualize learning. You're able to reach out to everyone with as much equity into that lesson as possible. Now, for this, I would believe that you will have to evolve something called a standard operating procedure. Now, the standard operating procedure, of course, it can have a wide ramification, various things that are talked of in the name of SOPs. In our context, it means the following. If you're going to use an online medium, if you're going to sit in front of a screen and talk, please make sure that you're visible to the student. If you're going to speak, please make sure that your audio is audible to the other side, that there isn't noise around you, that everything that you are saying is very, very clearly being transmitted across this medium. On the other side, the student's discipline is not being disrupted. In fact, this is one of the major worries that we have right now, that children's habit of regularity in terms of studies, in terms of going and sitting in front of a screen for 45 minutes, concentrating on what's happening, following it up with all the work that has been assigned during that. This has been completely lost. Forget about the fact that they are on their own, not exploring anything. But even this basic discipline of attending to the class, taking down notes, doing something, this is something that we'll have to teach these children. It is not as if children were born with all these capabilities. Like we learned along the way, we will also help these children learn this, but then try and pin this down. If the parents are around, they require some instructions. If there are 4 or 5 children in that same room, then they will require some instructions of what to do, what not to do. So please evolve a little checklist saying these are the things we want you to do. These are the things we don't want you to do. No getting up in the middle of the lesson and saying, sir, I want to eat and come. This, from very little trivial things of this kind to various larger disruptions. In fact, in some fancy schools, we have also had anecdotal evidence of parents actually interfering in the middle and coming and actually talking to the teacher and disrupting the class. So there could be various such issues that you have faced, you have imagined, you believe that should not happen. Try and evolve a little checklist and pass it on to the teachers, pass it on to the students, and pass it on to their parents too. Co-opt the parent into this whole process because they are the ones who are enabling the classroom now. The classroom monitor is sitting at home. Now, we also need to focus on what are teaching technologies and what are learning technologies. If you happen to use a PowerPoint presentation, this is a teaching technology. It doesn't help a student learn. It might help you summarize a lesson. It might help you flag those new words, new terminologies, new techniques that you want to show. If you have shown a picture, if you have shown a video, All of these can initiate learning. All of these can help a child kickstart its learning, but it doesn't ensure learning. For learning to happen, student has to engage with this learning. The student has to do something with this learning, the information that it has got. The processing of this information, the back and forth that that child will do with this, and the attempt to apply this into a new situation, that is when learning happens. So if at all there are technologies which enable them to do all of those things, then we will call them learning technologies. So it is not essential to embellish our television screen with, fancy moving things, having animations, having videos, showing 100 things. They might actually turn out to be distractors rather than a focused learning thing. Do this little exercise, go back to YouTube, try and pick up a topic of your choice and find those 10, 15 little videos which are talking about that subject. And you will soon notice that each of them follows a different style, a different way of presenting, uses different kinds of aids. But if you are very interested in that topic, if you have a problem on hand, if you want to learn, none of these technologies actually play, one is not better than the other. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to say that don't worry so much about teaching technologies. Focus on a good lesson, identifying what is it that the student would like to learn, identifying what is it that this subject, this topic actually requires that you as a teacher explain to the student or describe to the student or show to the student, and try and see if that part of the communication is well transmitted to the student, so that the student gets an opportunity to have received the right kind of information, and then follow that up with instructions for activities, practice, drill, whatever else that it is that you want to do, and evaluation, so that the student will be taken through the rest of the process, which is obviously offline, and will at the end of it be able to produce something. Now, in this context, if you ask the distinction between a word like reading and a word like writing, reading is where the input comes in. Writing is where I demonstrate to you that I have learned. So if I have set an assignment where the student has not to read, but to write, then obviously the student has finished learning and shown us that it has indeed learned. And we have a chance to evaluate, we have a chance to give a feedback to the student and so on. So there are many such newer possibilities in this new way of packaging the class. Dream through it. It's obvious that my own experiences will not necessarily be the experiences that you have. Perhaps you will be able to invent 5, 6, 10 different ways in which you would like to configure it. You know your students well, you know your syllabus well, and you know the circumstances under which you teach. But this kind of a packaging expects some new roles for the teacher. And two of them are that we would like you to become something called a librarian and something called a curator. Now, the curator, the word comes in the context of museums, where someone picks up information and packages them in a manner in which the audience can be given. Now, in the specific context in which we are dealing with, we are saying, if I have looked at a chapter, if I have asked what is it that this chapter requires, I have the textbook with me. I can assign some activities which I have designed or picked up from somewhere. I have created worksheets. I have looked at 10, 15 other videos maybe on the web, and then said, oh, yeah, this is very useful. My student should look at this, pick them up. So as a librarian, I have collected a lot of resources which are appropriate for that particular topic, for that particular chapter, put them all together into some kind of a collection and curated it. That is, tried to say, in the first page of this new lesson, what is it that the student will require? Will he require to practice something? Is there a new equation here? Would he like to see a demonstration here? Is there an experiment that can be shown? Is there some activity that would have helped that child appreciate this concept? Is there some biography that I want to introduce? Is there some person I want to introduce there? Each of these will define what technology I will use, what medium of communication I will use. So the teachers are now trying to morph themselves into these two new roles, of one of a librarian and one of a curator. And our belief and our demand should be to try and see that over the 2, 3, 4 years that we will deal with children like this, we convert them into responsible children, responsible to themselves, responsible to their own learning, know that they have to learn because they want to learn, and they have been excited adequately by the teacher, and they become what we call self-directed learners. Sitting at home, they know that they can use the YouTube, they know that they can use various other gadgetry, they can look at things around, they can read books, they can do all kinds of things and learn for themselves. And in this entire planning, the focus is on learning. The focus is not on teaching. You are only that facilitator and the guide. You, of course, have taken care to ensure that all the possible opportunities that need to be given to children have been provided, but the focus is on asking whether the child has learned, whether every child has had opportunity, whether every child has had a chance to learn. And then along the way, we have also taught them how to learn. So the prescription finally is that you don't really require technology in many of these cases. If at all you require, you might require very low technology, send off an SMS, good enough. In fact, over an SMS, I can have a complete conversation with children and have question answers and get them completely resolved. And if at all there is a need for a technology, be very selective about it. Don't use something because somebody told you that that's the most fancy technology around. Don't complicate your lives. Don't try and bring in things which will make it difficult for you to deliver your lessons. Don't use technologies which cannot reach the other end, where students do not have the capabilities. Don't try and spend more time on technology. Spend more time on understanding how this topic is best communicated to the child. Try and spend time on understanding who this child is, whether the child is already running away, is a genius, or whether it is at the lower end of that spectrum and is even struggling to read now. Try and see how you can reach out to each one of these students individually. That's from my side. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I would be glad to receive any questions, clarifications, any debate on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I think that was a very, when looking at the topic versus what you actually said, I think it should have made everybody sit up and think about it. But I have a question, because out of practical being a parent of a child who has gone through this 1 year of whatever learning, or very little learning that's happened. I've seen you get added to all these parent groups and all of those things by these schools and teachers. The pressure I see there is for teachers. I see the point of what you're saying. Focus. Don't focus on technology. But I see all messages that say, when is the next Zoom class happening? When do we do a live session? We are finding it very difficult. There was a parent who actually said, you shifted the onus of teaching onto us, and the schools are not doing so. There is a genuine problem at the. I see the logic of what you're saying, but how do we actually translate it into this one?
All right. Right now, because we have not been doing that at all for a long time, it looks a little alien, and it looks as if this is some newfangled idea which will work in maybe some other country, maybe. All right. The point of learning. Why do we send children to school, or why do we have a structure called school? This is because we decided that each of us parents do not either have the time or the bandwidth. We might be from a different profession. We might, our own time might be best spent on it. Or it might simply be that I am unable to handle this particular subject because I have never studied it, or I don't know anything about it. All right. So society decided to create a structure called school, equipped it with professionals, equipped it with people who were trained specifically for this purpose. And we invested time and effort on passing them on. But somewhere along the way, we started taking this for granted. And some of these schools also started, bullying parents to believing that it's our job, you don't interfere, and so on and so forth. After all, it is that parent's child, right? That parent has a dream for what that child would like to become. And the school should at best have been facilitating this. So there is a very important need for re-establishing this communication between the parent and the teacher. Now, I wouldn't like to make a very generalized statement of this kind, because each school is different, each set of parents are different. Within a group of 50 children in that class, there may be one or two parents who are, completely extreme in their opinion about what should happen. But this communication has to be established. And simply because even if you as a parent wanted to send your child to class, there is no opportunity for you. And if you were so very critical about this whole thing and you actually sat through one of those online sessions, you should be able to make a judgment of whether that is good enough for your child or not. Otherwise, why do you take your child for a dance class, for a music class, for a singing class, for God knows various picnics and so on and so forth, if you were happy with the exposure that the students were getting in the school itself? So therefore, I believe this is a partnership. This very idea that schooling is a partnership between a parent and a teacher has to be re-established. The hierarchical positioning of either a parent or a teacher has to be broken. Both of them should start communicating with each other. Both of them should start understanding each other. Very likely that the parent's experience has something to educate us. The parent's experience tells us that, look, these are the kinds of features of a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, which you don't have a good experience of, and therefore you need to be educated about it. Be open about it and try and re-establish this communication. I believe then the effectiveness of this situation becomes that much more. But for parents who are listening in, and where many of us have a chance to go and speak to teachers, I believe we shouldn't be treating them as, I'm paying you a fee, you better deliver kind of situation. All right, that teacher is also as much a victim of our schooling system as anybody else. And that teacher was not trained for this new circumstance.
I just have one follow-up question before I'll pass it on to Praveen. This is a question that, do you see this kind of a blended learning model as the new normal? I mean, considering that we're going to be looking at 1 or 2 years, and perhaps even after we come out of this, do you see some sort of a blended model emerging out of all of this as being the new normal?
Yes, I do see this. Not that there is going to be periodical lockdowns and schools being shut down and so on. I hope that doesn't happen. That there are, because schooling is not just about going to a classroom, sitting there and listening to some science and maths. There's a lot of social interaction amongst a peer group that happens there. 8th standard children working with other 8th standard children learn a lot from each other. And that is the most important learning that you will try to recall. If I ask every one of you to try and recall the best moments you had in school, those will not be about some teacher having, shown some experiment or whatever. It will be about the great friendships that were made. It will be about the great social interactions, the cultural activities that you participated in, the small picnics that you went to, the lunch boxes that you carried, the small little fights that you had. Each of them are opportunities for building up us into what we are today. And that is an investment that will certainly happen. And therefore, I believe that schools must, get back to normal, that there is something called a school. But at the same time, the schools, by its very nature, by its very structure, by the fact that they have timetables, by the fact that they have prescribed syllabi to be covered, by the fact that there is some administration breathing down on them to cover that syllabus and finish the child in a way. So this has to be undone. And that interface for undoing it, fortunately for us, you see, if you try and recall how many books you had access to, how many visual resources you had access to vis-a-vis your child today, you will realize that technology has permitted us a much broader opportunity for reaching out into the world and interacting with people, getting to. And teachers should also start leveraging on that. How good it would be if I can identify some 10 people who are better informed than me in that subject and who can actually spare some time and come and tell my children something as trivial as that. I can also show them the world, which is something I couldn't have shown. I could easily expand on the subjects which I could not otherwise have done. All right. And self-directed learning, once we have trained children into self-directed learning, I believe children will really gallop far better than what we have been able to manage. So essentially, this whole prescription is for increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of schooling as a process, not school as a structure. but schooling as a process. And the schooling as a process is all the adults involved in the life of that child, trying to enable that child to blossom out into a much better person than what it is possible today.
Sir, there is a question in the chat box.
Sure.
The pandemic and the lockdown subsequently had actually exposed the disparities in access to technology between the urban and the rural areas. So especially in the rural areas, though the the education minister claims that we have conducted lots of online classes and classes have been beamed on Doordarshan and all that, how many kids have had access to it has actually been limited.
Yes.
So have you come across any successful models where through which we have been able to increase that access? I'm sure we can't make it 100%, but have we been able to successfully make it or improve the access?
Very surprisingly, I haven't come across anybody who has tried practicing what I try to dream right now in your presence. But then I have come across experiments of this kind in the non-technology area. And one of those that I can immediately recall is a book called Country School, 1930s, when America still had something called multi-grade classrooms. Multiple classrooms being taught by one teacher, multiple classes or multiple groups of children being taught by one teacher, and the single teacher classroom trying to interface with parents, with the community, and in some way integrating all of that into creating an experience for the child, which was better. Now, in the specific context of our society having degenerated to a point where each of us is running an individual race, that is what is the impediment in this whole situation. It is not so much to do with learning. Why should it have been individual? Why can't I learn from each other? All right. So can I imagine, like, if there is a small village and I'm very sure that at the end of the day, in the evening, those children are still playing with each other. There isn't any great COVID. It's all an urban phenomena practically that, each of us have locked our children into our houses, with masks and whatever else. Perhaps there are enough opportunities for children to interact with each other. The first times television came into India, we were always found in the neighbor's house because we did not have a television there. Right? And no neighbor ever protested. They allowed a group of children from various houses to come in, and they did not even know who these children were, but they allowed them in. Of course, circumstances have changed today, but it is possible for us to try and see who are these children, where are they located, can they be brought together in some sense of it? Can one person who has a better access provide this access to everybody else? Can this offline medium, for instance, be from that house rather than, so there is one person with a PC, one person with a laptop, and so on? Or there are children who have passed out of our schools 5 years ago and have now, are in college, but are sitting at home right now, and they could be used as peer leaders. They could be used as models. Children learn best from models who are slightly older than them than from teachers. And if there is a teacher available in that village, that teacher could be the Kannada teacher, but then there's no reason why that teacher can't be hand-holding everybody else in science and mathematics, right? So it is a matter of we being convinced that it is essential to reach out to every child. It is essential to think of learning, and it is essential to ensure that we don't deprive somebody of an opportunity to learn. It's not necessary that I finish the syllabus, all right? That's not the most important thing, but we should. In fact, we should do 4 times what the syllabus is doing, because as a teacher, my experience was 2.5 months, 3 months, I can finish off any syllabus you give me, right? But that's finishing it off. That's not the purpose. All right. So we are looking at this as an opportunity, which is why I said, let us look at the possibilities, let us look at the opportunities that this creates, where I can reimagine this entire concept of how somebody learns, who can they learn from, and how can I, as a catalyst of this whole process, enable that. So if that is the spirit, I believe quite a few of these issues will get automatically resolved.
One more question from the chat box, a couple of questions clubbed together, is we have been talking about flipped classrooms and the increased access to information to students for quite some time. And this pandemic actually gave us this opportunity to really try them out and see if it will work. But most teachers have actually come back saying that it is not working. Initially there was a spike in people saying that we will go online, and now there is a fatigue that has set in.
Yes.
Not everyone enjoys an online class now. So what is the way forward?
The way forward is to take charge. We have allowed the authorities to tell us what to do. We have asked CBSE sitting in Delhi to tell us how in Hegardev and Kote the classroom should be organized. I think it's high time we stop doing this. We are best suited to understand the circumstances in which we are teaching. We are best suited for understanding the individual problems of children. That there is this child who is actually running a fever today has never been accommodated in this entire model. So this is a supply model. So try and see if this can be reversed. All right. So if a child, for instance, has missed class today, what is that alternative that I'm trying to provide? It is simply that I have decided that my supplying something is far more important than whether it has been received at the other end or not. So if this conceptually, if I can make this jump and go to the other end and say, has my child benefited from what I have done? I would go out of the way to conceive of it differently. But of course, this cannot be done overnight. And I'm very sure there would be enough number of us people out there who are trying to tell me he's talking impractical stuff. All right. So therefore, give it a try. At least convince yourself that that child is important. At least convince yourself that that learning by that child is important. And that learning doesn't happen in one period. It happens over 10 years. That's why we have a 10-year school. And 10 years is not 220 periods every year into 10. It is all the time that that child has. It is all the dreams, all the aspirations of that child that we are trying to cater to. So try becoming that facilitator, that guide, that enabler, that provider, that whatever else that you believe you want to do. But try and see if the learner can be kept in the focus every time we ask such a question. And if it is possible for me to tell the headmaster, we don't have to complete this syllabus, but it's important that this child learns something because I can always cover this up later on in the next year. So it's certainly a change in mindset. It is certainly something which is practicable, but only thing is our starting points have to be converged. All of us have to agree that learner is the most important part of this whole thing. Without a teacher, there can be a school, but without a learner, there cannot be a school.
Mr. Sabapati has a question, sir.
Yes.
Good evening, sir. Actually,
Good evening.
it was a very powerful and precise nuggets on teachers' new redefined role. And I really liked 2 points: learning for the sake of learning. And the second one was self-directed learning. Those two were key takeaways for me. And I have 2 questions to ask you, if you may permit. Number one, what are your suggestions for the work-life balance for teachers who are struggling to balance their professional commitments and their personal commitments? When they are taking class, they are also supposed to take care of their own kids and their family members, and their expectations, the family members' expectations are still higher compared to the earlier position. That's number one question. And number two is, what is your view on completely becoming online one-to-one schooling model over the brick and mortar model? Because I asked this question because one of the giant edutech, Byju's, is coming up with a model of one-to-one online based schooling. So what is your view on this, sir? These are the 2 questions. Thanks for the chance.
Thank you. Coming to this first question about the teacher trying to balance out her professional life and so on. When you ran normal schools, there was a time when she somehow found a way of landing up in your school before the assembly. She lasted through that 6 periods. Very likely that her mind did travel back to home. Maybe there was a child ill at home. Maybe there was someone else who had to be catered to, some other arrangement that had to be made in the evening. Somebody was coming visiting, and I had to cook and so on and so forth. And I can very well understand. I've seen enough number of teachers, particularly lady teachers, who are under great pressures of trying to balance out these two. But somewhere along the way, I have told myself that I want to be a teacher. I want to be a professional about it. So whether you give me 3 hours, whether you give me 4 hours, give me that 3 hours. Find a way of learning this habit of being professional about this whole thing. I cannot allow interference of my personal life into school life, and nor should I allow the headmaster and the principal of that school to start bullying me on Sunday afternoons and telling me, no, you better do this and come tomorrow morning. All right. School time is school time, home time is home time. So if both of us agree that professionally we will respect each other, we will understand each other's needs and provide for them, to a large extent, this problem will get mitigated. It will not get solved. Simply because we are trying to be in two boats simultaneously. I'm certainly not saying teachers, lady teachers should not become teachers. In fact, I would love it that, everybody becomes a professional teacher. There is nobody on earth who understands children better than mothers, and they must be the ones who should be championed in this. But at the same time, this balance has to be brought in. Now, the method that I'm trying to suggest, where larger and larger portions of the work has been handed over to children, the burden as seen by the teacher today. In fact, if you do a little survey and find out what is that burden that this teacher is carrying, she is carrying the burden of, children not having studied, somebody punishing me because children have not performed, and so on and so forth. In fact, right sizing that problem for her, helping her resolve that problem, helping her create self-directed learners, to a very large extent will minimize this problem. Okay. Again, this will have to happen at a very local level. If there are 10 teachers with you, if there are 50 teachers with you, you will have to find a way of how you will organize your situation in such a way that these 50 people's problems are solved. There cannot be one government policy sitting, somewhere which will say, right, from tomorrow onwards, nobody's going to have problems. They're going to have problems. All right. These are problems which will be there for some time. It will not be there for some time, and so on. Coming to your second question, there will be Baijus of the world operative as long as schools are unsuccessful at selling their product. You continue to sell a faulty product, there will continue to be more and more companies which will sell a better deal than you. Whether it be Baijus who sell tuitions, or whether there is some STEM education fellow who will come and sell some great project work, or somebody who will come and offer to take your child to NASA. These fellows cannot be wished away. They are there because there is a failure. Just like your immunity system allowed the COVID virus to come in, you are going to allow all these fellows to come in. So cleaning up our act, I believe, would be the solution. But again, that is not something that we can clinch right now over this conversation. And if at all there is a need for it, maybe we can have a larger discussion some other time. But essentially, everything cannot be online simply because learning is about cultural, learning is about social aspects, learning is about learning to live with each other, learning to deal with each other, engaging with human beings. And that cannot be done online. It should not be done.
So just there are two things that you brought out. One is the aspect of moving from teaching to learning, and also so both at the supply side and the demand side, and there is the concept of self-learning, because both of these things are easier said than done, in the sense that most of these require paradigm shifts in the people who are going to be delivering on this, as well as learning at the other end also. So if you could just give us some tips on how this could be done, and use that as the base for your closing remarks as well, sir, and then
yes,
go
sure.
towards the closing remarks.
Sure. There was a time long ago when, I was sitting in a bus reading a book. And there was this old lady sitting next to me asking me, are you not old enough to have stopped studying? Okay. Now, in everybody's mindset, there is something called some definite period of time where we do what is called learning. And after that, we stop learning. Right? Unfortunately, there are many professions where one can get away with it. You become a shopkeeper, you learn new skills and so on, but then you don't have to read another book again somewhere in life. But a teacher has pushed herself into this profession where she is peddling learning. All right. And like a cobbler can survive only if that fellow can peddle his ware, his skills, his techniques of cobbling. A tailor can do that with tailoring. A teacher can do that by demonstrating learning, by showing that this is the way I learn, this is the way you can learn, by being that expert in that class who can actually promote learning. So if she transforms herself into a learner, and if she can show the joy of learning, the great thing that has happened because she is learning, teaching can become so very easy for it to happen that everybody else is going to be inspired without even making too much of an effort. So if a teacher can demonstrate learning, and if the student can get excited about learning, half our problems are already sorted out. The rest of it is administration of learning, and that there can be 100 solutions for how we go about organizing things. Which one will we do first? How will we do it? Whether we require technology, whether we require time limitations on that, and so on and so forth. But essentially, if there can be learners who are excited about learning, and if they can sell to other younger people how to learn and how to get excited about learning, maybe they don't learn your subject at all. That doesn't matter. Maybe there is this Kannada teacher who will inspire a great love for mathematics. I don't know. There will be, each of us has talents. Each of us need to recognize that. Each of us need to stop being subordinates to that greater system. Each of us should start seeing in us that expertise that we have. Each of us should start believing that we are the best thing that can happen to us, at least to begin with, and then therefore to all my students. And if we can successfully try and make this a part of our habit, our skill set, our the entire makeup of ours, our personality, I believe our efforts will become much lesser, and we should be able to efficiently carry out the tasks before us. But yes, there's no magic wand to this whole thing, and each of us will have to work our own way through that. I fought the system all along. Even the last couple of years in service, I have been fighting. So there isn't an easy solution to that.
Thank you very much, sir. But before I, propose the formal vote of thanks and other things, a couple of announcements. All good things, need to come to an end. So we are on episode 46, which means we have 3 more episodes to go before we hit the last episode of Guru Mantra. So that would be the 50th episode. 50th. So in that context, one of the things that we're planning to do is to, if each of you could, if you could let us know if some of what has been, some of what you've heard, and then if there are any practices, good principles that you've taken and implemented in your school, please share that with us. You could send us 1-minute short clips, videos. You could use the WhatsApp number, or you could email it to us, or anything. So that would be very useful. You would also be, showcasing some of these presentations, and also inviting some of you to speak on that last session, which would be a slightly longer session than normal. So that is one of the announcements and also requests that I'm sending out. And as far as this session is concerned, thank you very much, sir. I think it's been actually, when we think of technology, we think of the latest, but I think you brought it down to a level where it was so realistic that it's made a lot of sense to a lot of people. I think people have struggled with, grasping what they need to do given the situation. I think you've simplified the whole idea of how to, grapple with such a situation. I think that is the most single biggest learning that I think I at least took from this, and I want to thank you on behalf of Vivekananda Institute for Leadership Development, as well as the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, for this wonderful session that you've shared your thoughts with all of us.
Thank you very much, and I was indeed the recipient of a lot of love and effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And next week we'll have Dr. Annapurna Singh, Director CFTRI, who will be speaking on a topic that is nutrition and cognition, how nutrition can improve or help build cognition. So that is what we will be talking about. We look forward to having you all again next week. And thank you, and have a great weekend, all of you.